Hi guys, Eric here again. In the alley, another beautiful day. No better time to get to the bottom of this Toyota. Anybody following along, what I was saying yesterday, whenever I was mainly concerned on this oil control valve, but the fan came on when the engine was ice cold. And coming out of the wiring harness, I seen this nicked wire. I assumed that was for the ECT because it threw a ECT code right away. And, you know, the fan shouldn't be run on a cold engine. But whenever I took the harness apart, that's actually for it would be the cam B sensor, the exhaust cam sensor, a single wire sensor. These two wires I cut because I have to, this is where the harness ended, and just from years this vibration and everything, it actually broke some of the wires inside. So I have to resolder. I can't just repair it like that. So, and the ECT is kind of hard to get to. I couldn't keep the ohm meter leads on it, so I just cut these wires because I have no problem soldering, and I have to be in here anyways. So what I did is put two alligator clips on it. The code's the ECT open. One of the things though, while I was on it, whenever I moved this wire, it's the cam sensor wire, the fans were coming on and off. I couldn't find a nick in either of these two wires that actually go to the ECT, but there's common grounds there and there. So I'm going to clean them up, you know, see what else I find in here. But that seemed to be the only nick, and this was definitely the wire. When I moved it, it was turning the fan on and off, and it was going to -40 and then going to regular temperature. So, you know, I don't know if this could be grounding something out, you know, through the actual ground. But hey, I'm going to repair the wire, and then we're going to see where we stand with that. But naturally, I'm going to check the ECT to see if it was open. That's the code. So I just cut the wire because it's easier to get to. Plus, it's a good way of checking the harness and your actual connector while you're there. And the easiest way, the lowest is the most accurate. That's overload, overload. So we had to go to 20K scale. 2,970 ohms of resistance. And then while I have it on there, I wiggle the wires that are left in the connector. And if that number starts to fluctuate, then you start suspecting, you know, you have a connection issue, maybe one of the pins. But on the chart, let's see if we can focus here any better. Would be between 68 and 77 degrees. So this used to be my neighbor's old body shop whenever I was a kid. He's still got some of his old thermometers. We're almost 70, so that'd be close enough to not cause an open code. That number there tells you it's not open, but for accuracy, you know, that's a generic chart, but it's fairly close. So saving looking up the extra spec of what a Toyota one is, we're going to just go with that's okay, solder it back together, see if that fixes any of the hidden issues that this was going on with the ECT. All right, guys, I'll be back after I make the repairs. I know everybody has their own tried and true way of soldering, but the way I always go, a couple nice tools I found. I mean, these actually came with a set. I don't think it's the same set, but with these flush cutters, they're very almost like, you call them jewelers almost, pliers, and they let you make a very, very small loop with very small radius like that. What I usually do is tin the wires first, and then just hook over both pieces and bend them down, because it makes it very small first, so you could use the right size piece of shrink wrap over it. Whenever it's finished, you want it to be able to fit in there pretty nice, and that's usually if you have too much solder on, or if you twist these together, that's what you run into. You have to use a piece of shrink wrap so big that it doesn't seal on the wire right. And then I just leave them like that until I'm And everything, especially the old wires, if they're bright and shiny, usually you don't need the flux, but yeah, I still use the flux anyways. But on the old wires, so like if they're not brand new wires, whenever you look at them, they got little green to them. You always want to use flux then. And for underneath the hood, I've just been using, this is a Harbor Freight brand. It's a Schneider, but it's just a butane soldering gun or soldering iron. It works pretty good for like automotive stuff. If you're not looking, you're not going to do circuit boards with it. And to do the tinning in the small wires, this is some real old rosin core Radio Shack. But for the tinning, you don't want to use too thick of a diameter because it just leaves too much on there. This thing heats up pretty quick. Usually if you have a couple of them already cut up, you said heat that flux up, send some solder in right after it. There's as many ways to do this as there is to do about anything else you could think of, but some people start from the bottom, wait till the top gets hot. But you could almost see, I don't know if you could see it on the camera, how that, all the solder on top just, it like flashed silver, and it was all molten in one. So that means the solder got sucked the whole way through the wire. Just any sharp pieces, just take off, let it set up, give it the tug test, and if it, you know, they always stick together that way, and then put your shrink wrap over them. And anything that doesn't, like if anything was sticking out that might jag, you just take the flush cutters and cut that little piece of solder off. Then whenever you pull on them, the hooks give you a little bit more of a mechanical connection. It could have actually been a little bit shorter, but I put a couple big pieces of shrink wrap in there. This one's a little bit excessive, but that one's just about right. This one will cover it no problem, but just my way of doing it. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen two people solder the same. But if you're ever wondering why you don't get your shrink wrap over, or it's not the right size shrink wrap, just make sure you keep that soldering joint as small as you can and get the thinnest solder that you could find. That stuff's been working. I've had that one roll there for years. I had a couple of the old Radio Shack rolls. I mean, they were good stuff. Now it seems like all the other rosin core I get, it's just horrible. All right, guys. All right, if one person didn't know this trick, it's worth taking a couple minutes just to share it. Whenever you got a wiring harness to tape up like that doesn't give you a lot of room to get a roll of electrical tape or friction tape around, just take a little socket and just keep wrapping it around the socket until you got yourself a little mini roll. And then that way it's a lot easier to get this socket in between the valve cover and anything else you have to go around to make as long of a piece as you can, because nobody wants to put just, you know, one wrap at a time on there, and it's pretty hard to get around them. So it's an old trick that's been around, I'm sure, you know, and 95% of the people out there know that, but you know, that do this stuff. But like I said, if one person didn't know this, I mean, you're gonna use this for the rest of your life on every wiring harness you wrap up. And just put on there as much as you think you need. It's okay to reload a couple times, because the thicker you make this, the harder it is to get in and out of where you're going. But the general idea would be, if you wrapped it like that, then wherever you have to start wrapping from, it's a lot easier to control this little socket and get it in and out of tight spaces. See, as we bring it up here, a roll of electrical tape, it would have never did the trick in there. Wherever you got to go around, just keep bringing it out the same way. It's, you know, it's a pretty tried and true method that, I mean, I really don't see them making anything else easier on us. And if you knew you had a job like this and a couple scrap sockets, I mean, you could keep a couple of these preloaded, but it actually takes you longer to load the tape than it does to do your taping. All right. Nobody's going to want to watch me sit here and wrap up a piece of harness, but hopefully my hand was out of the way enough that you get the idea. You just keep going till you're out of tape. It's okay to have multiple pieces in there, but you don't want one wrap each turn, just like trying to cut a piece of electrical tape and put one wrap around them. They just fly off like leaves in the wind. So this way, let you get a little bit of tension on it and pull the tape tight. Kind of make your own homemade harness out of it that way. You could use friction tape too. Works a lot better with electrical tape, but friction tape, if you know it's going to be going around a corner or something that is going to rub for sure, friction tape over the electrical tape works wonders. Here's just a little bit better look at how good you could tape it up using a socket to put the tape down. You could have where all the rigid line departs and, you know, goes back into the harness. And it works pretty good. I mean, it's a very good way of wrapping wire. And you always want to leave it, you know, you don't want the bare wires exposed. You want to leave it like you at least, you know, made a good effort to get the harness back together where you had to get into. And, you know, that way, that's 100% good. I'm happy with that. All right, guys, wish I had some better news, but got everything on the other side taped up. Got the harness all wrapped back together. Everything's going good on that side. The ECT quit throwing the code. The engine actually idles better than it has in a very long time. Somehow that was the crank cam sensor B. It's a single wire cam sensor. The other day when I was getting a square wave over here, I was thinking maybe that was back feeding, but how would a single wire? I don't believe that's possible. But anyways, it was shorting out. I cleaned out some of the grounds that go to the head. But whenever I got back over here, once it ran, the ECT code disappeared. But it's saying the VVT's open, the circuit's open or shorted. Now, whenever I looked on the schematic, there's only both the wires leave the ECM. That would be the OCC1 and the OCC1 minus and the OCC1 positive, which would be the yellow and the black and yellow wire, which go across. Here's where 1 and 2 go right back to the camshaft, the timing control, the VVT. So those two wires go straight into the ECM, so that's what I did. I went into the ECM. What I did is I put a T-pin behind it, and then I just got it with a grabber. I went on to the OCC negative with a wire piercer, and I'm getting the same thing, you know, clamped to the ground for the computer itself. But what happens is, as you can see, nothing on the voltmeter now. Turn the key on. Starts up, 0.10 volts. Camshaft, A actuator, opener short, oil control valve assembly, or the ECM. But whenever I clear the codes, we could see it goes up to 2.11 volts was the highest I've seen. Then the code re-triggers and it goes back down to 0.10. There's nothing else on the circuit whenever I checked the wires all around everywhere, I mean, I wiggled everything, pulled on everything. It's not a pin, it's not a connector. It's that's the best there is. If it went up to 12 volts, whenever that happens, before I think maybe it was an intentional shutdown due to something else, but it's not even getting battery voltage whenever it does kick on. So even at the 2 volts, it's going to set the same code for a short, because it could be shorted to ground or completely open to set that code. But now, that's with the engine, with the oil control valve plugged in. The oil control valve's unplugged, and we go down to 0.08. So, looks like this one's going to be probably a junkyard computer. But what I'm going to do next, well, I'm going to make sure there's one available locally used. But I mean, this one I might even take a shot at and open it up, being it's in the passenger compartment. Why I was seeing the square wave there, maybe it was when I cleared the codes, I was starting to see the beginning of that 2 volts. But the min and the max on the U scope, it was picking up almost battery voltage. But sometimes when these ECMs go, they short out. They get a little bit erratic and intermittent, and then whenever they totally go, they totally go. But that's going to be my next step. And if I can open it up, if I see the transistor, I have a couple more cars to bring in. I'll bring you guys along, show you if anybody interested in anything I'm bringing in and working on. All you guys say is, what you want, pictures of, schematics, whatever. So we're all here to help each other out. So if you need anything I could help you out with, it definitely drop a line. If you got any comments, tips, tricks, whatever, I appreciate everything, guys. Thanks for watching on this, and I'll keep you posted as we move on. Final note, for everybody who was following along with the pressure transducer, I had that APT 100, it's a 500 psi pressure transducer for in cylinder, or anything you want to use it for actually. But what kept coming up was like the hoses, some of them have a stop valve in them, some of them don't. It's better to use a rigid hose, and the rigid tube that they do give you with that Chinese transducer, it's aluminum and it's very lightweight. And even the hose quality, I mean, I didn't have no problem. I didn't hear no compression blowing out anywhere, but it doesn't look very heavy duty. But rodkey.com, I got a pulse sensor off of them recently. I'm happy with the quality. I haven't used it yet. It's in the box, but I mean, I've heard nothing but good things about Rodkey, and that was my first thing I got from them. I really like that. I mean, just how it's put together and the reviews of these things. Now, they have a flexible hose. I mean, you could tell these are much more robust hose. It's for a different transducer, but it's an M14 adapter, so either I already have the adapters or it should be easy to adapt to, but you could see there's no valve in hose. And the other thing I did order was that one's for diesel for this. It's the rigid extension kit. Well, these are much better. Rodkey recommends using the smallest, the shortest in the rigid before using the flexible hose. So if one of these will work fine, if both of them together work fine, it's still better than the flexible hose. But sometimes you still need a flexible hose. But you can tell these are a lot heavier duty, beefier than what comes with the APT 100. Right, and you see for the price, $18 and $12 for the flexible hose. I mean, these guys are very, very reasonable. All right, guys, check them out if you haven't. Thanks. I'll be in touch and we'll adapt to it whenever it gets here. All right, adios.